Would you vote for this presidential candidate? Part one. I'm going to be starting a series where I will jumble up policy positions and give them as kind of an AI president. I'm not trying to do a gotcha where I say, oh, do you support X, Y, and Z? You actually love Gavin Newsom. I'm not doing that. These are genuinely, scrabbled positions. And I'm just going to see, would you vote for this person? Would you consider voting for this person? Or would you never vote for this person? So comment down in the descriptions what you think of said candidate. And I'll give my takes on if I think this random candidate could win. So free healthcare, and I'm just going to give the main positions. I'm not going to give, the top 100 positions. The main positions for said candidate. Free healthcare, free college, pro-life, so anti-abortion, and anti-immigration. Now, you don't really need to get into the specifics in terms of what anti-immigration is. Is that an immigration moratorium? Is that deportation? I'm just giving the vague positions. They're for free healthcare. What does that mean? Does that mean single payer? Does that mean an opt-in? It doesn't really matter. You kind of get the gist. Now, those are the four main positions. Obviously, we have two that are heavily supported on the Democratic side, not really supported on the Republican side, and then vice versa. Now, in terms of free healthcare and anti-immigration, they both have some decent support on the opposition side. So with the free healthcare, a good chunk of Republicans do support healthcare, depending on how the question is asked. And then a good chunk of Democrats, most specifically the further left ones, more of the Bernie wing, are anti-immigration because of it reducing wages. So you do have some crossover, but for the most part, you see we've got two Democratic positions. You see we got two Republican positions. Now, I'm going to tell you, first thing, before we get into the how much of the far left, the center, the right, and the far right I think would vote for this candidate, I do want to point out that it does get a little murky because would this person run as a Democrat? Would they run as a Republican? Would they run as an independent? Look, if you run as an independent, unless you are a superstar and there is scandals, crazy scandals on both sides, in the 2016 election where both of them got under 48% and weren't really that popular, maybe that would have been the window for a big third party, someone that's super rich, super popular, that is kind of picking and choosing just the most popular positions. I think in the modern era, you need to pick a Democrat or Republican. You need to run with them. And I think with this policy platform, you probably would get kicked out of both. Now, probably if you had to pick one, if you had to kind of wiggle your way into one camp, I think the Republican camp you could wiggle your way into more because the anti-abortion and anti-immigration are probably their top two most important positions. So I think you could probably, if you give them those things, especially if you go hard on those things, they can obviously accept the free healthcare, free college, they can, whatever. Now, if you had to hypothetically not really run on one of these things, if you dropped the free college, as I was saying, and just went with free healthcare, anti-immigration, and anti-abortion, I think that'd be a legit futuristic 2028, 2032 Republican ticket. Now, we are going to get into the far left, so I'm going to tell you what percentage of these buckets I believe would vote for this candidate if they were an independent. I know I've been talking about them running as a Democrat, them running as a Republican. I'm going to be talking about them running as an independent, just because I think it makes more sense. Obviously, if someone runs a Republican, the majority of Republicans will vote for them. If someone runs a Democrat, the majority of Democrats. But if they're an independent, how much do I think they would get from each camp? The far left, I'm going to go with 10%. I think the far left loves free college. They love free healthcare. They also support immigration moratorium. Some of them do, depending on which people in the far left you're talking about. They obviously are pro-life, or they are pro-choice. But I think some of them would vote for this candidate. In terms of the left, I think you'd probably get 0%, maybe 5%. Look, the two biggest issues that the normal Democrat believes in is abortion. In terms of how late they want it to be legal, that's, to Democrat. But if you went anti-abortion, that would kick out a lot of Democrats. You went anti-immigration, that would kick out the rest of them. So I don't think you get any Democrats. And then some of them, unironically enough, would be anti-free college, more of the centrist Democrats. Now, in terms of the center, and the center is a little murky because does that mean independents, which some independents are of one of the parties, they're just not registered with the parties, but I think 30%. I think 30%. I think there'd be a good chunk of independents that are like, we have a viable independent candidate. Most of these things I'm fine with. I think they're good. I like 3 out of the 4 of them. They're less corrupt. We got a new person in there, et cetera, et cetera. So I think 30% of the Senate would vote for this candidate. I think 10% of the normal Republican would. The abortion might actually turn off some women that are Republicans, kind of similar to the free college would turn off some Democrats that are more normies. Anti-immigration, most Republicans support that. Free healthcare, most standard Democrats or standard Republicans are probably fine with it. I guess they don't like the free college, obviously. So I'd say 10%. I'd say 10%. Now, in terms of the far right, I think there's a good chance that the far left and far right would both get above 10, 15, 20% on said candidate. The far left, look, they obviously are anti-abortion. They are anti-immigration. And those are their two most important things by far. More specifically, the anti-immigration. But they also don't really mind social programs from what I've seen. They support free healthcare for Americans. Now, what they view as Americans might be a little different from your average person, but they're not opposed to social programs if they're for certain people. So I think some of the far right people would, if you can kind of defeat the socialism label, the communism label, I think a lot of people on the far right would consider this candidate at least. Now, do I think this candidate is viable in an election? Not really. Look, you got to be in one of the two camps. Even if you were in one of the two camps, the voter turnout within your base would probably be suppressed because you're asking your base to forgive two wrongs. It's like if you're a Democrat, you're asking your base to, they love abortions, they love immigrants. You're asking them to pass on two things. If you give the Democrats 9 out of their 10 things they want, and you're asking them to go against one, okay, maybe. You're asking them to go against 2 of their top issues, no way. And with the Republicans, it's like you're asking them to really expand the social welfare state. They probably wouldn't go for that either. So maybe be an interesting independent run. Obviously, it depends on who it is. If the person's charismatic enough, if they're rich enough, if they can get enough social media attention, maybe. I wouldn't put it out of the cards that they could get 10, 15% and be a massive third party, depending on specifically how they market themselves. But I do not think this combination of free college, free healthcare, anti-abortion, and anti-immigration would be a winning